Do I start now? What time is it? It's 11:30. We should start, right? Isn't that what time? Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Shane Hips. I used to be the pastor at Mars Hill Bible Church in Grand Rapids here. And you may have heard of the other pastor, a guy named Rob Bell. And so we were co-teachers for a couple of years. And prior to that, I was a pastor of a Mennonite church, small Mennonite church in Phoenix, Arizona. And then prior to that, as you would expect, I was doing advertising for Porsche. So it's a fairly standard career path. How many of you were in the presentation I did yesterday? Anybody here? Okay, good. So a couple of you, there'll be some review, and then I'll kind of migrate off of some of the basic theoretical stuff into how that might relate more specifically to worship. You are free to ask questions as we go. I think we have like an hour. Is that right? Do you know? 1 hour? Okay. Good. Thank you. Great. So sometimes whoa, hi there. I talk a little better when I move around. I feel more comfortable. So, and I know you want me to feel comfortable. I know that's important to you. So a couple of things. When I was in advertising, my job was to basically hijack your imagination, brand your brain with a Porsche logo, and then feed you opinions you thought were your own. That's what I did for a living. You're welcome. And and then I became a pastor to atone for all my sins, and it's still not working. So in any case, when I was in advertising, I was a strategic planner. And a huge part of my job and what we were paid to do was to sort of try to understand how people were influenced, how they thought differently, what made them think the way they thought, and then ultimately how to get them to think the way we want them to think. So it's a highly manipulative kind of job, and in order to do it, there's no formal training. You just have to have sort of some degree of like unhealth and Machiavellianism, which I had high degrees of both. So this should really put you at ease as we have this time together. No, so I began to study different thinkers just to kind of think differently, and I stumbled across a guy named Marshall McLuhan, who's a famous theorist in the 1960s. He was actually a literary professor at the University of Toronto. And he wrote a book called Understanding Media in 1964, which absolutely blew my mind. And through the process of reading that, I began to deconstruct my own profession and realized that I couldn't do advertising anymore, had to leave that and went to seminary. But I also, as I went into seminary, I started to realize that so many of the things that McLuhan was saying had greater implications for the church than it did for people in my previous profession. And so I began to see all of these fascinating connections, and I actually began to see that McLuhan predicted things that would happen in the church 40 years before they would happen. And so I wanted to just understand how he thought so that I could learn to lead with a little more discernment and wisdom. So what I'll do is just sketch a little bit of his theoretical framework to help us begin to think the way he thought, and then I'll transition into maybe some of the implications of that for worship, since this is a worship conference. And then we'll just take questions, we'll interact on whatever it is that you guys want to talk about. So everybody with me? Sound good? Wow, that was enthusiastic nothing. You guys are great already. Okay, first thing that McLuhan is most known for is this aphorism: the medium is the message. Who can tell me what this means? The medium is the message. Yeah. It's not just what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. That's right. Good. So McLuhan is a really weird author. If you read his stuff, you'll see that actually he's incredibly dense. He was more of a poet than he was like an analytical thinker. And he used these bizarre probes and aphorisms, and he would say them, and then he would just kind of move on and not explain them. And then 60 pages later, he would explain it, but not tell you that he was explaining this. So really dense, difficult guy to read. So somewhere about 60 pages later, he explains this aphorism by saying this: our conventional response to all media, namely that it's how they are used that counts. So I'll pause there for a minute. All media, as we know, it's how it's used that counts. So if I ask you the question, is the internet good or bad? Your answer is yes, right? And why is it both? Because it depends on how it's used. Good. So if I put pornography on the internet, it's bad. If I put the gospel, it's good. So what you have is kind of a neutral conduit, a pipeline by which you channel information. The pipeline itself is, of course, of no consequence. It's a completely neutral feature. What matters is the content you pump through it. Everybody with me? So that's the conventional response to all media. He says, namely, it's how they are used that counts. Is the numb stance of the technological idiot. How generous, huh? He's a very generous writer. For the content of any medium is the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind. For the content of any medium is the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind. What he's saying is that the medium itself is quietly and secretly performing a work on us that we're not even aware of. So we can sit and have a debate about a particular TV show and whether Jersey Shore is good for America or bad for America, and it might be an interesting debate, and you might even be right. All the while, we would sit oblivious to the fact that the flickering mosaic of pixelated light is repatterning neural pathways in the brain. For the content of any medium is the juicy piece of meat carried by the burglar to distract the watchdog of the mind, while the magician slips the watch from your wrist. It's the sleight of hand. He says it more, kind of another poetic way that he says it. He loves hyperbole. He says, the content or message of any particular medium has about as much importance as the stenciling on the casing of an atomic bomb. So that's just a little taste of McLuhan. I think he's a lot of fun. He's incredibly hard to read, but I recommend it if you get the chance. I have a couple of books that I wrote. One was called The Hidden Power of Electronic Culture, How Media Shapes Faith, the Gospel, and Church. For those people that are very interested in McLuhan, chapter 2 of that book sort of does my best work at trying to make him accessible, and then try to draw out the implications of that. For those who want to deal with McLuhan directly, I would recommend starting with Understanding Media. Really brilliant book, very hard, very opaque, but it's rewarding. The other book that I wrote was called Flickering Pixels, How Technology Shapes Your Faith, and that was designed as a slightly more accessible version of what I did in my first book. So my website has some of that for people who are looking for resources. So the first kind of probe is the medium is the message, but he had another one which I really liked, which kind of described the opposite side of the same equation. So if the medium is the message describes the media themselves, he also said we become what we behold, which describes us, how we relate to our media and technology. And this might be a good time to just say a word about how I'm using the word media. So as you were thinking here about, probably most of us are thinking about digital and electronic media. For McLuhan, any human extension, anything that extended some human function or capacity was a medium. So what that means is the chair you're sitting on is a medium. This stage is a medium. The microphone is a medium. That podium, these lights, all of these things, these walls, how high the ceiling is, all of these things are media. And everything that we talk about when we're talking about the theory of the media applies to nearly everything. The clothing you're wearing, your eyeglasses, all of these things extend or enhance some human capacity. So that's to kind of give you a sense. So you can begin to see how all of this kind of thinking may have profound implications for worship, since worship has almost everything to do with media, space, how it's used, music, etc. Okay. So what does he mean when he says we become what we behold? Well, what he means is that our thinking patterns mirror the things we use to think with. Our thinking patterns mirror the things we use to think with. Let me try and show you an example of that. In 1400s, Johannes Gutenberg found a new use for the wine press, and he called it printing from movable type. And because he was fortunate enough to have lots of paper supplies and a phonetic alphabet, he could do something that the Chinese couldn't do. The Chinese invented the printing press long before Gutenberg, 1,000 years or so. But they didn't have a phonetic alphabet. which means they didn't have the efficiency of 24 characters to choose from. Gutenberg did. And as a consequence, it gave birth to the age of print. Now, everybody kind of identifies the printing press era as a major change in the history of the West. The age of the Enlightenment came about, and nearly everybody assigns the change to the fact that there was new information now available to the masses. Well, there's something interesting about that observation, which is it's not entirely true. And the reason is because 75 to 80% of all manuscripts that started being printed for the first 200 years of the printing press era were actually medieval manuscripts and classical era manuscripts, which means this was not new information. This was information that had been deeply embedded in the culture for hundreds of years. The best-selling books, by far, were medieval books, most of which were oral tradition that were now in printed form. In other words, it was not new information that was distributed to the masses, it was old information. What was new was the form, and that form had a profound impact on the way that the furniture of our minds are arranged. So let me just look at and show you how we become what we behold by looking at a case study of the printing press. So if you just look at the form of the printed word, not the content, just the form, what it looks like. First of all, it's linear, line by line by line by line. It is sequential, must be perceived in sequence. Without the sequence, none of it makes any sense at all. Oh, I think I just went backwards. How about that? It's perfectly uniform, and it is infinitely repeatable. And so what that means is, if in fact we become what we behold, and the dominant means by which a particular culture made meaning and communicated was the printed word, roughly 400 years, then that means that this became our thinking pattern. Linear, sequential, uniform, repeatable. This became the very first assembly line, and it shaped everything from the way we make this. Oh, sorry. Look at that. I keep going back. I'll get there one of these days. So this lineal arrangement of sequential shapes is the first assembly line. It patterned and became the archetype for how we make cookies. It became the prototype for how we make bottles, how we make cars. It didn't just affect how we make things, it also shaped our architecture. You can see the way in which the shapes of these documents became patterns in our world. It's important to note also that pews did not exist prior to the printing press. Notice the linear, sequential arrangement of all of these shapes. If you go to any culture that never had the printing press as its dominant means of communicating, you'll notice their worship space looks nothing like this. Usually there are no pews at all. So you understand how dominating we are as people. We are imitative, mimetic beings, which means we become what we behold. All the while, this is happening beneath our conscious awareness. So, between 1850 and 1890, a slew of uninterrupted inventions completely dissolved and reconstituted the communication structure in the West. The print age came to a close in the 1800s. And if you'd like to understand what's happening in our culture today, you will be best served by looking at what happened in the 1800s. Because in the 1800s, the medium by which we used to make our meaning and communicate fundamentally changed. And that was a whole bunch of inventions that harnessed the power of electricity that gave rise to the electronic age. And they were the rotary press, the telegraph, the photograph, all channeled together, the telephone, everything, radio, all of this sort of collided and created this new world. It recast the world as icons at the speed of light. And so when you have this new world that emerges and we become what we behold, the image age transformed us in the West. And the invention of the photograph is the only thing I'll talk about right now. When the photograph was invented, it did a couple of things. One, it retrieved the medieval age. As you know, during the Middle Ages, literacy rates were at an all-time low. Paper supplies were next to nothing, which means the only way that people could apprehend or know anything about the stories of the Bible were through stained glass windows. And it wasn't even through sermons, because the sermons were in Latin, which wasn't the vernacular of the people. So if you were French, you were listening to a Latin sermon. The homily was used more like mystical pronouncement, like these otherworldly words and sounds that sort of wash over you to kind of bathe you in some sort of mystical power. And then if you wanted to understand something, you'd look at a stained glass window and you could see the story of Jesus, perhaps. Paul effectively disappeared during the Middle Ages because there's no way to depict you are saved by faith through grace in a stained glass window. Or you can, but it's going to be really hard to convince someone that they all should have the same meaning. But you can depict Jesus as a shepherd, Jesus wept, Jesus died on a cross, Jesus rose again. These things you can depict. So, one of the things that the image age has done is it has systematically begun to erode our preference for Paul in favor of our preference for the stories of Jesus. And if you want to look for evidence of that, a canary in the coal mine would have been the emerging church a couple of years back. When they started to come on the scene, one of the things they kept advocating for was a return to the life stories of Jesus over and against Paul, which had been overemphasized during the Enlightenment era by Luther and others. Which, incidentally, if you look at Martin Luther's translation of his Bible into German, he has a section in the preface that says, "Which are the true and noblest books of the Bible?" And he says that the three Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are to be subordinate to the Gospel of John and the letters of Paul, which far surpass and rise high above the other three Gospels. And the reason he believed that is because Paul and John taught the theology of God, whereas the others merely taught the stories of God. So this is, of course, a highly literate, biased mind. And you can see how there's a kind of an interesting pendulum. Depending on the media we use, it will tell you which parts of the Bible you will prefer over others. So now I want to just take a look at the form. This is slightly oversimplified. There's a lot more complexity to this, but to try to get clarity, I'm going to just walk with me on this. I want to compare the difference between these two media, the printed form and the image form, and I want you to see how they function differently. So here's a printed description of something. The boy is sad. What effect, if any, does that have on you? Probably not much. It's just a description. Same content, different medium. Now, what effect does that have? Yeah, you're sad. I'm sad too. It makes me sad. I've seen it thousands of times and I'm sad. The exact same medium. Exact same content, two different kinds of medium, and yet a totally different effect. Now, I can hear you thinking, and I know what you're thinking, and you're kind of scolding me a little bit, right? You're wanting to say, Shane, come on. We all know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So maybe if you put 1,000 words up there instead of those 4 words, then we could have kind of a competitive comparison. It'd be a little more equal, right? Maybe a poet could come along and he could talk about how really sad the boy is and describe in vivid detail with beautiful metaphors okay, that's all possible. However, that statement, a picture is worth 1,000 words, fundamentally misunderstands that these two media are radically different modes of discourse, and they cannot convey what each other can convey. It is the same reason that I can't do this presentation using smoke signals or interpretive dance. Though you might like to see me try, I'm not going to, because I don't want to be like a YouTube video, thing. the medium precludes certain kinds of content. It excludes certain ways of communicating. So let's just look at the way these look differently. We'll compare them next to one another. The printed description is abstract. The form, not the content. Nothing about the T, the H, the E, the B, and any of those letters, none of them look anything like a boy or sadness. They are meaningless, squiggly shapes that your brain has to abstract from and create meaning out of. Whereas the image is utterly concrete. The boy is sad is perceived sequentially. The image is holistic. The printed version is rational, processed rationally. The image is processed intuitively. And the printed description is processed primarily in the left hemisphere of the brain, whereas the image is processed primarily in the right hemisphere of the brain. Now, this is somewhat metaphoric, but it is real. That if you have a culture whose entire way of thinking about the world is formed by a left brain medium, then you'll find that that culture will start to tilt heavily to the left brain. And the more that it tilts to the left brain, that's your left, by the way. This is my right, I think, so. Sometimes I get them confused. Anyway, the more you tip to the left brain, the more you begin to value abstraction, logic, reason, order, mathematics, sequential. Masculine values become much more pronounced in the left hemisphere of the brain. Not male and female, but masculine. And so during the age of the printed word, when it reigned supreme, you'll notice that they destroyed any worship of Mary, any veneration of Mary, any appreciation of Mary. Women were not allowed to be involved in much of anything. Whereas during the Middle Ages, when the right brain reigned supreme, feminine values emerged. Linking rather than ranking, intuition, connectedness, relationality, community, experience, art, the rise of nuns, the veneration of Mary, the appreciation of feminine. So you can begin to see what we believe is sort of ex nihilo theology designed to like argue for a perspective on something is really just us imitating our medium. But we just don't realize it. So we get in these wonderfully big fights about which one is right and which one is wrong. All the while, we sit oblivious to the fact that the medium has slipped the watch from our wrist. Okay. So, used to work in advertising. Oh, do I have that? I don't think I have it. That would have been fun to show you that. Oh, well, we'll do it another time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about worship space then. So I'm going to pause there before we move on. Comments or questions, observations you have, things you want to argue with me about, push back on, whatever you want. Let's take a few minutes. We'll do that, and then we'll kind of migrate into how all this stuff has implications for worship. So this is more kind of the theoretical side of the questions. We'll get into more practical stuff here in a minute. Thoughts? Okay, sounds like you all agree. Right back there? Or are you just giving me an amen? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you just stole my biggest point. Thanks for nothing. I don't know if I have this or not. I better have this. I can't believe it if I don't. Let me see. Do I? Yes. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We'll do this little exercise. So because you just said that, I'm going to do this little exercise, and then we'll come back and talk about that. So let me first just say, what I did was a bit of an oversimplification. I understand that. I realize that I've read poetry and cried, and so I'm not saying that words can't evoke emotions. What I'm trying to do is show you how instantly and universally. So did everybody here when you read "The Boy is Sad" feel her sadness? No. But did everybody here when you saw "The Boy is Sad" feel some kind of emotion? Okay, so only 3 of you have a pulse. Because if you didn't feel some kind of emotion when you saw that, you're not a human. So, seriously though, I'm actually really asking, did you feel nothing when you saw the boy? Raise your hand if you felt absolutely nothing when you saw that boy. Okay, that feels better. Now I know I'm with humans. Okay. There is another, so then what happens is whenever I do this, people usually ask, okay, well, what should we do then? Like in worship settings or in preaching or whatever, like what does that mean then? Like should we not use images? Should we use images? How does that work? So my main point is you have to understand what images can do and not do, what words can do and not do, and their ultimate effect. And once you understand their effect, then you can make your judgments. So let me do an exercise to show you their effect. I want you to imagine, I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to say, there once was an old man. And I want you to imagine that old man in your mind right now. I want you to think about the hair of that man. I want you to think about the skin of that man, the eyes, the nose. What do you see? So have that man in your mind right now. I want you to think about that man, that old man. Now, if there was a way to project everything that you all just thought onto this screen, we would have 1,000 different pictures of an old man. Many, many different old men on this screen. Because some of you cycled through multiple old men in the process of landing on the old man you had in your mind. And what that means is you had an experience that was not shared, and it multiplied all kinds of options for you, all kinds of thoughts. Now I want to do the same exercise. There once was an old man. Now, how many of you, when I said picture the old man, thought of this old man? Yeah, one. There's always one in every, I've literally had that, maybe not every time, but pretty consistently I've had at least one person be like, yeah, of course, it was Gandalf. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. Who wouldn't think that? Now, what I've done is I have summarily replaced every old man in this room with this one. What I did with an image was I created a shared experience. Now, I don't mean you have an identical experience. I mean you had exactly the same stimuli to react against. So, words, both spoken and written, unleash imagination. Images captivate imagination, but they create a shared experience. 2 different kinds of media that shape us in different ways. So the question is, do you want to unleash imagination or create a shared experience? Which is better? Right. It's both, but it's not neutral. That's the important thing. It can be either, but it isn't neutral. Nothing we're choosing is neutral. All of them have a bias of some kind. So, does that make sense? Does that help you at all when we're... Okay, good. Other questions, comments about theory and stuff? Yeah. For sure, absolutely. What I'm suggesting is you have a shared stimuli to which you react against. And it's the same reason that the movie is never as good as the book if you've read the book first, because you created something, and then it was replaced by Peter Jackson. And you can't remember then what your Gandalf was, because all you can think of is Ian McKellen now every time you read the book. So that's that. Good. Other comments, questions? Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the fundamental challenge of the digital age. It's not just image on a television show, it is the false sense of self we create in social media. So there's a false self that we project into the world that says, here's the pictures that best represent who I am, and then I withhold the pictures of me waking up in the morning, and, you know, where the light is just a little bit not right on my belly, and, you know, so I have, like, if you go to my Facebook page, I'm ripped and handsome and, you know, tan, and, you know, it's not reality, but it's what I want you all to think I am. And then I listen to all the coolest music, and I never listen to Britney Spears, but secretly, of course, I do, but I never want you to know that, so I tell you, here are all the cool bands that I like, and here's all the, so you're constantly posturing just like you do in junior high, and it isn't, it's a false self, it's a persona that you create, and then worse than that, it's not actually a window that you're giving people, it's actually a mirror you're looking at. So you're cultivating something that you then get to study and look at the numbers and check who's commenting on you and whether or not your comment was commented on by other people or shared by other people, which means whether or not I'm valuable, and then how many people want to be my friend. And so I have an actual number, and I can see if I have more friends than that person. And it's just fascinating, like it turns junior high into metrics, but for adults. And so what you'll find is like a rise of narcissism in our culture. I mean, there's actually documented rise of narcissism for people born after 1980, and it persists long after it normally did historically. In part because of self-focused websites that create false realities and false relationships. But that's a totally another story. I'm going to try to focus on the worship thing. But that is a great comment. Yep, here. Yep, that's right. That's right. Entertainment is one of the great values of the digital age. The virtue of patience, waiting, suffering, boredom, these are spiritual practices now. They used to just be part of life. Now they're things you have to go looking for because you can instantly be ejected from your boredom with your phone. So, yeah, I mean, there's a whole spiritual practice of presence and waiting and all that stuff that has to be cultivated in order to kind of move against some of the natural momentum of the glut of entertainment and consumption and efficiency that are the kind of the holy trinity of the digital age is basically consumption, entertainment, and efficiency. Good. Other comments or questions? Yep. Greatly benefit us. We are living in what would be called, so the Middle Ages would be dominantly an oral culture, print age would be a literate culture. We are now living in what would be called a secondary oral culture. So what that means is we retrieve elements of oral culture, but we carry forward still the legacy of print. So we're not a purely oral culture anymore. So we have a hybrid. We have elements of those. So what you'll find is in the Middle Ages, theology as a discipline was highly, highly imprecise, and very few theologians were around. And so that's why you could get like Merlin the wizard, who ended up in like the Legend of King Arthur and the Knight, you know, like these random kinds of things barnacles can attach. And then you hold them pretty lightly. Whereas in the print age, dogma and doctrine becomes the kind of the highest order supreme thing, which incidentally, if you're Dutch Reformed, Presbyterian, evangelical of any kind, you do not exist without the printing press. The printing press is the medium that caused you. Without it, it's impossible. And your entire, I count myself among it, our entire way of faith is bound to the printing press. And as that printing press goes into the dusk of its life, so will our faith, which means we have to continually reinvent and reattach faith to new media because that's what we end up doing. And we just don't know we're doing it, but that's what's actually happening. So many, many, many of the theological shifts that you see happening are a direct consequence of the internet and the form of the internet. Yeah. Yes, print actually nationalized culture. Electronic media globalized culture. So print created nation states because of common language that could stretch beyond. So nation boundaries became based on language patterns. So France became anyone who spoke French, and they live in this area, and they can extend far beyond they normally could, and English, German, Spanish. So everybody in Europe, anyway, Western world, was nationalized. With electronic media, it globalized. And so, yeah, we're living through kind of this global implosion, and he did coin the global village. That's right. Yep, back there. Yeah, one of the things that I would love for us all to be able to do is to not make judgments before we understand. I think we move, especially in the church, really fast to the good or bad, good or bad, good or bad, good or bad. We have no idea what's going on. And I think we'll encounter any new shift the way you would encounter like a banana peel on the ground. You just, whoop, slip. So my interest is, first, do you understand what's actually happening to you? How you came to these conclusions, how you're becoming what you behold, what it is you behold, and how that radically shapes your entire consciousness and imagination of God. Because if you do, one of the first things you'll have is profound humility, because you realize you're like this mimetic, imitative creature who can't seem to like think for themselves, because the magician's constantly doing its work on us. That's the first thing I'd like to see happen. Then I think we could have a healthy conversation about what's good or bad. But even the category of good and bad is based on the values of the particular media that is communicating to you. So, for example, if you are a right-brain biased person, then the loss of dogma and doctrine in favor of story is a wonderful thing. But if you're a left hemisphere person, the loss of dogma and doctrine is like the worst possible thing that could happen in favor of this squishy story over here. What about truth and absolutes? So you have this really fascinating kind of challenge that way. My interest ultimately is to just think about the natural ecology of the brain. You have a right and a left hemisphere that are completely different but not at odds. And they found an ecological relationship with one another. Couldn't we also do that? Couldn't we also find an ecological experience of these various things all intermingled rather than at odds in binaries? So those would be a couple of thoughts. Let me just say a few words about worship space, because I know I've only got a few more minutes, 20 minutes or so. Just so you can see how this stuff changed. So during the print age, this is kind of the main worship space, architecture, structure that emerged. Hymnals, all that stuff. Music became visual, linear, notes, all these things. Prior to the print age, this was not how music was primarily thought of. Then you had... After the electronic age, you have like these kinds of worship spaces emerge, which are like no center, no margin, just sort of this circular, nonlinear, image-based space with lots of tactile experiences, and basically the Middle Ages with like electricity, and that become, and then the people that do that kind of shun and hate and despise pews, and people who have pews kind of don't understand and despise this, and a lot of the work we have to do is continue to help people understand. If you're shaped by the printed word, there are certain things about this that you will find really, really disorienting. And if you're profoundly shaped by digital media, you'll find pews incredibly restrictive. And that's just life. That's sort of just reality. So let me show you one, just for fun, one little ad that I think could describe the difference between words and images better than I could. So let's watch this.
Hey, I saw this brilliant film last night at Canal Plus. The Emperor's Journey.
The Emperor's Journey.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's set in the Antarctic.
Really?
There are hundreds of emperors, and they're all marching across these ice fields for days and days. Sometimes they slide on their bellies, to go faster. And at one point, one of them gets eaten by a seal. It's horrible. Yeah, but there's some really moving moments, too. Like when they pass their eggs to each other. Yeah, because before that they were all mating. for hours.
It's a great ad, isn't it? Movies are made to be seen. So there you go. That summarizes. I could have just gotten them here and shown you that and then left, but I thought I would just do this instead. So we can, if you want, we can talk a little bit about preaching and a little bit about music, or we can kind of do a free-form question and answer time. We've got about 15 minutes left. Does anybody have preferences? How many people want to hear more about preaching? Okay, a couple. How many of you would like to hear about music? Okay, most of you are more music-based, so I'll just give you just a couple of things about music. I'll move through the preaching slides here. Sorry, everybody who wanted preaching. I do have, for those of you who want to know more, I have some videos online on my website with the stuff about preaching, and so we can talk about that later. These are just different ages. Okay, so one of the things that's happening with music is because of the digital age, what you have is effectively a collision and a convergence. So when I pastored a church of multi-generational people, there was a guy in his 80s and a person in their 50s and people in their 20s. When you ask the guy in the 80s, what kind of music did you grow up listening to? He says, what do you mean? We just would go to church. I think we had a radio, but I'm not sure. Because I was living on a farm and, so I would listen to hymns growing up. That's what music was, hymns. Talk to the person in their 50s, and they might say, well, growing up, I listened to the 3 radio stations we had, and then that was it. So basically 80s music. It's what I listened to. And then I'd go to church, and there was this bifurcated experience of church music, which was weird, and then my music, which was radio music. And then you ask a 20-something, what kind of music do you listen to? What radio stations do you listen to? And they'll be like, I have no idea what radio is. You mean Spotify or Pandora? And then they'll say, yeah, I listen to sort of jazz and fusion, Latin groove, pop. I listen to classical, and then I also like, funk, post-punk, Brit pop. I like this. And you have these finely honed distinctions like a wine connoisseur in their ability to understand this vast array of global music, and all of it is welcome and none of it is shunned, and it's all just sort of this collision. So this fascinating thing would happen. You'd talk to people in their 40s and 50s, and they'd still be set in the worship wars, because for them there are 2 kinds of music: praise music and hymn music, and that's it. And one is better than the other. And then for the people in their 80s, they're like, there's only one kind of music, and I don't know what this new stuff is, but it ain't working. You talk to someone in their 20s, and there's what are you even talking about? There's just music. There are no barriers or boundaries to music. Again, it's predicated on the global village. The barriers and boundaries are removed, and there's a massive convergence to music. So what I want to do is show you what happens now I have to caveat this up one side and down the other, because it's always, tricky when you're talking about your local context and what you should do in yours. So let me just disclaim my context for some of the music I'm about to play for you. Grand Rapids, Michigan, 6,000 people, mostly Caucasian. This was Mars Hill. And they really loved the music we did, and all generations represented, so kind of a wide range. Now, it tends to skew younger, but one of the things that the worship leader did at Mars Hill that I just thought was brilliant, and it reflected perfectly the leading edge of what I think happens increasingly in the digital age and music with worship, and that was he understood collision. He understood convergence. And so, again, keep in mind, it's a mega church. We got lots of resources, so every quarter he would do something pretty incredible. He would get all these volunteer musicians to come up, and he would do really bizarre stuff, where some Sunday he would have a string quartet, another Sunday it would be funk Sunday, another Sunday it would be bluegrass. And he would take then popular music like Jimi Hendrix and put that to the string quartet and then sing a hymn instead of Jimi Hendrix, but he'd use the Jimi Hendrix music. Does that make sense? So total train wreck, right? But people were utterly engaged because there was always a sense of surprise, and there was always a sense of honoring this incredible diversity and collision of musical expression, and that nothing was excluded. Everything was welcome. So I'm going to just play you a few examples just for fun. See if you can recognize the songs. Every one of these is a Just to be clear, it's not like this every Sunday. Like I said, it's about every quarter he would do something like this that would just kind of invert everything. So here's, just see if you can recognize, all of these have references to popular music. Everybody know this? Shout it out. Journey. Don't stop believing.
One God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things seen and unseen.
So you get a feel for there's this unexpected surprise. So everybody in the community is going, oh, Journey with a string quartet. How bizarre. This is fascinating. And then what? Which song is it going to be? I don't know. And so there was this, he would just find ways to integrate and do, and it was wildly connecting for people. And the worship wars didn't really exist in those moments. There was a sense of something significant. Here's another one.
Your kingdom shall reign over all the earth. Sing to the Ancient of Days. For none can compare to your matchless word. Sing to the Ancient of Days. Every tongue in heaven and earth shall declare your glory. Every knee
You can dance if you want.
in worship to be exalted, O God.
So, anybody know that one? That's right, roller coaster. So, and by the way, if Troy were here, which he was here last year, he would hate me because this is mic'd for like the band, not from the room, so it's a terrible recording, but you still get the point. Okay, here's another one. Love the tuba.
Wonderful grace of Jesus, reaching to us.
And everybody just smiles whenever they hear this. They're like, this is awesome. I don't know why, but I love it. So you can see there's not like a style. There's just like this cacophony. Okay, here's another. This is one of my favorites. He did one Sunday where it was all keyboards. 1980s keyboards, and one was a keytar. Do you know what that is? Like from the 80s, like the keyboard guitar thing? What a great instrument that is. Okay, here. That was this Sunday.
So let the glory of the Lord rise among us. Let the glory of the Lord rise among us. The praises of the King.
What song is this?
Rise among us. Let it rise.
Yeah, it's Prince. I don't know. I can't remember which one, but it is Prince. 1999. There you go. Okay, let's do this one. 8. And what you guys just did there when everybody's like, oh, that's what the whole congregation does. And there's this moment of like surprise and anticipation and enjoyment.
All right, here. Let everything that has breath praise the Lord. Let everything.
Okay, Jackson 5, right? Isn't that, I got that right, didn't I? Which one? Does anybody know which Jackson 5? ABC. Well, we got our man right here. This is the guy. Okay, here's another one. String Quartet Sunday. Yeah, Coldplay.
I sing the goodness of the Lord who filled the earth with food, who formed the creatures by his word and then pronounced them good.
So one of the things that's interesting, I'll do one more and then we'll be done. One of the things that's interesting is like the people of the older generation loved being there because there were so many young people there, but they would feel honored by things like that. Like a string quartet, even if they didn't know Coldplay, it doesn't matter. It's a lovely string quartet. There's not too many drums. It's not offensive to the ears. And you're playing a hymn. So it works for like an older generation. Now, it's not like that every Sunday, but and then the younger generation is like, we love all music, so anything's welcome. That's a trombone, a tuba, trumpets. I think this was Funk Sunday. Anybody know this one? Beyonce, that's right.
All creatures of our God and King, lift up your voice and with us sing. Alleluia, alleluia. Thou burning sun with golden beam.
You guys are going to be singing this one all day.
Silver moon with softer gleam. Oh, praise him. Oh, praise him. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
All right, I'm pretty sure that's the last one. Is that it? I think it is. Okay, we've got like 5 minutes or so to just talk about whatever you guys want. If you're interested in more resources and stuff and things, ShaneHips.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHips. There's a bunch of stuff. There's a podcast that I did about media and technology called The Third Way Faith, a couple of books, and then also 3 films that I did that are kind of expanding on everything I've done here in a more robust way. So comments, questions? Did you have one? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So one of the things he's asking about is churches who decide they can't have windows because they need screens, so you got to block out all the light, versus churches that use big windows that kind of show creation or allow the city that you're in, you can be seen and see the city and all that. And the question is, what does that mean? Well, what it means is every single choice you make from a media standpoint has a gain and a loss. There is no pure expression of anything. There's only gains and losses, consequences and choices. That's it. What my interest is do you understand what you're losing and what you're gaining? And does it reflect what you want to gain and what you can accept you're losing? So that's kind of the biggest issue. So for example, there are some places that like to make sure the lighting is really low and the music is really loud. And what that does is it allows for the greatest degree of anonymity and the most likely experience of release and intimacy with God. Because you can, for certain kinds of people, you're not being watched and you can't be heard, which means you are a bit more by yourself and you can let go. So what do you lose? Well, one of the first things you lose is community. Is that bad? I don't know. If you're a Mennonite, yes. If you're not, it's fine. But like in my Mennonite church, we all sat in the round, 300 people basically in the round, and the lights were very high, which means when you came in, you couldn't sit in the back and hide. We could see you. What that meant was worship looked a lot like this. Because you were being watched. So the idea of like releasing yourself into God, no. I'm in a community and I'm getting watched. Well, so great. So we have like the best potlucks, and if anything ever happens to you, we have like 50 people that come with like food for you to eat, and we'll do a barn raising if you need it. But like you'll go to worship and it'll be pretty sterile because no one feels free to be who they are. So gains and losses. Which is better? It just depends. So the same thing. Connectedness with creation and the city outside, that's a theology. If you have a particular theology that values community, make sure your lights are up high as much as you can. If you have a theology that values ministry to the city and connection with creation, make sure you have windows. If you don't have those theologies, then it's fine. you know, and close it, be about art and experience within and all that good stuff. Mysticism. Make sense? Okay, good. I think we may be done. Let's do one more, and then we'll close it out. Yeah, we got like 2 minutes, so go ahead. Any other questions? Yep. Yeah. Yeah, great question. So the question was about, what about like Twitter and Facebook and all these things that are still text-based media? So it's not like the print age is gone, and you're absolutely right. That's why I was saying we're in a hybrid age. So the legacy of print is still with us. Literacy rates are still very high. What you'll see, though, is there is a couple of important shifts. One, in 1940, prior to the invention of television, the average vocabulary of an 8th grader was something like 40,000 words. Actually, it may have been a 4th grader. I can't remember the exact, but it's somewhere a younger person, roughly 40,000 words in their vocabulary. The average vocabulary of a sophomore in college today is roughly 7,000 words. And the reason is because reading enhances your vocabulary and television shrinks it. And any kind of image-based culture, the vocabulary atrophies. And you end up with kind of a limited bandwidth of ability to kind of shape and speak reality in certain ways. So that's an indication of a decline, but it's still present. The other thing that's interesting is the literacy of the digital age is increasingly a bizarre form of right brain literacy. So for example, if you consider Twitter or TweetDeck or whatever you use, it's often still kind of a mosaic of ideas. It's not like a clear page after page after page, here's the clear linear logical sequence to which something unfolds. What you have is just random data coming at you from all angles. Not only that, what's being written is increasingly becoming a kind of hieroglyphic. So if you look at what's called leet speak, a colon and an open parentheses is not a colon and an open parentheses, it's a smiley face. So you're making use of our phonetic alphabet and you're turning it into an ideographic alphabet, which is a right-brained experience. So there's just a couple of thoughts. Okay, you guys have been fantastic, wonderful. I'll be here for a few more minutes. Thanks for your time. You're great.